Welcome back, Mitchell Mustangs, on this Thursday, April 16th. Thank you so much for joining us again so that we can finish Charlotte's Web. I'm so excited. I can barely wait to see how this story, how E.B. White will continue to have the following actions take place so that the resolution, so that everything can come together in this story. So, great readers, we understand that stories that are written well give us a lot to think about. And sometimes we're given comfort in things that we think about in stories, sometimes we're given knowledge. This really is a classic because there's so much for us to think about. There are many different characters for us to follow. Templeton, we might be thinking about him, and is he really a good friend, even though he has helped out? Wilbur is alive with the help of Templeton, but is he a good friend? Thinking about Fern and Avery, two children that we follow and have a good time getting to know. Fern, who is changing as of the last chapter. She wasn't even there when Wilbur received his award. And Avery seems to be staying the same. And I'm always interested in why authors keep characters the same, and usually it's to show something in another character, and I think it's to show that Fern is growing up and into a next season, and that's all very normal. One little side note, E.B. White's first revisions of this book did not have chapters 1 and 2. He started at chapter 3 with Wilbur in the barn. And in his last revision, he added the character of Fern, adding Fern and her brave personality and her saving Wilbur. So that's something to think about too. I always wonder when I learned that chapters 1 and 2 came later, that Fern and Avery were the last characters to be added. I have always been curious to know if the book would still be a classic, because I do think that Fern and her bravery in the beginning is something that a lot of us follow as readers. Some of us might be following Mr. Zuckerman. Mrs. Clifford sent me one of her writing responses, her reader's response from this week, and she wrote about death and redemption, because we know Mr. Zuckerman was the antagonist. He was the problem. Yet he's the one keeping Wilbur alive. And so the redemption there, and lots of phrases and lots of things that E.B. White said really supported this idea that Mrs. Clifford is following. So as readers, we read books at different times in our lives, and I'm really, really old, and I've had lots of experiences, and it fascinates me how every time I read Charlotte's Web, there is something that touches me so deeply, and it might even be the same thing that I'm following. I'm always fascinated by Charlotte and how she really did everything for Wilbur, and Wilbur shows in the end, it showed yesterday where he said he would do anything for Charlotte, and now he's got the egg sac. So he did very much develop inside of this friendship, and I'm so curious to see what happens today. But I love how Charlotte was so real in yesterday's chapter, because we learned her thinking and her saying that, she wanted to lead a life that meant something. Oh, I think that's so powerful. And how she explains, of course, she was loyal, and of course she was a good friend, but she got a lot out of the friendship too. She felt that by helping Wilbur, it gave her life great purpose. So there's so many things for us to think about. Let's jump in. Let's finish this book together. And as we leave this book today, let's take bits of comfort or bits of knowledge and think about, why did E.B. White write this book? What was his purpose? And I think there are many themes inside of this book: bravery and hope and friendship and childhood and death and redemption and selfishness with Templeton. Lots of things for us to think about, but maybe there's one thing that we're thinking about more than the other, or one character we're following, knowing that the major theme really is friendship, the major theme of this book, and how this friendship, how they both evolved, and how they both seemed to have gotten something from the friendship. So let's finish up. Here we go. I'm so excited. A warm wind. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck he wore a medal of honor. In his mouth he held a sack of spider eggs. There is no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good. His friends and the sheep and the geese were glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen where visitors could examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web still hung in the doorway. Every day Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors and the wind shook them and they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the red little apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and foxes came in the night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered the house and barn and fields and woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in the yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down the lane and out onto the frozen pond in the pasture. Coasting is the most fun there is, said Avery. The most fun there is, said Charlotte, is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are in the top car and Henry makes the car swing and we can see everything for miles and miles. Goodness, are you still thinking about that old Ferris wheel? Asked Avery in disgust. The fair was weeks and weeks ago. I think about it all the time, said Fern, picking snow from her ear. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled on the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn, too, for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung around the barnyard the way boys hang around a drugstore, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. Many, many, many thanks, they always said when they saw food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig trough was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime, and Wilbur kept the promise he had made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat it. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you ever saw. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. You would live longer, said the old sheep, if you ate less. Who wants to live forever? Sneered the rat. I am naturally a heavy eater, and I get untold satisfaction from the pleasures of the feast. He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack as though he were guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was so important as this small, round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he awaited the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always a rich and steady time when you are waiting for something to happen or to hatch. The winter ended at last. "I heard the frogs today," said the old sheep one evening. "Listen, you can hear them now." Wilbur stood still and cocked his ears. From the pond in shrill chorus came the voices of hundreds of little frogs. "Springtime," said the old sheep thoughtfully. "Another spring." As she walked away, Wilbur saw a new lamb following her. It was only a few hours old. The snow melted and ran away. The streams and ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a steady breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened. The mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed wider and a warm wind blew. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, he noticed something moved. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, no bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray with a black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tan. It looked like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely. 2 more little spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed round and round on the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more little spiders, then 8, then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal. Then he raced in circles, kicking manure into the air. Then he turned a backflip. Then he planted his front feet and came to a stop in front of Charlotte's children. "Hello there," he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so small Wilbur couldn't hear it. "I am an old friend of your mother's," said Wilbur. "I am glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right?" The little spiders waved their forelegs at him. Wilbur could see by the way they acted that they were glad to see him. "Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need?" The young spiders just waved. For several days and several nights they crawled here and there, up and there, around and about, waving at Wilbur, trailing tiny drag lines behind them and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count them, but he knew that he had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon, each was as big as a BB shot. They made tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning. When Mr. Zuckerman opened a door on the north side, a warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of the damp earth, of the spruce woods, of the sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updraft. One spider climbed to the top of the fence, then it did something that came as a great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets in the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed a balloon. As Wilbur watched, the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. "Goodbye," it said as it sailed through the doorway. "Wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where do you think you're going?" But the spider was already out of sight. Then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, made a balloon, and sailed away. Then another spider and another. The air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a spider. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. "Come back, children," he cried. "Goodbye," they called. "Goodbye, goodbye." At last, one little spider took time enough to stop and talk to Wilbur before making its balloon. "We're leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment for setting forth. We are aeronauts, and we are going out into the world to make webs for ourselves." "But where?" asked Wilbur. "Wherever the wind takes us, high, low, near, far, east, west, north, south. We take to the breeze. We go as we please." "Are you all going?" asked Wilbur. "You can't all go. I would be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want that to happen, I'm sure." The air was now so full of balloonists that the barn cellar looked almost as though a mist had gathered. Balloons by the dozen were rising, circling, drifting away through the door, sailing off on the gentle wind. Cries of "Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye" came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch any more. In sorrow, he sank to the ground and closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke, it was late afternoon. He looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked into the air. The balloonists were gone. Then he walked drearily to the doorway where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there thinking of her when he heard a small voice. "Salutations," it said. "I'm up here." "So am I," said another tiny voice. "So am I," said a third. "Three of us are staying. We like this place and we like you." Wilbur looked up. At the top of the doorway, 3 small webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. "Can I take this to mean," asked Wilbur, "that you have definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar and that I am going to have 3 friends?" "Yes, you can," said the spider. "What are your names, please?" asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. "I'll tell you my name," replied the first little spider, "if you tell me why you are trembling." "I'm trembling with joy," said Wilbur. "And my name is Joy," said the first spider. "What was my mother's middle initial?" asked the second spider. "A," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Arania," said the spider. "How about me?" asked the third. "Will you just pick out a nice sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too dumb?" Wilbur thought hard. "Nellie," he suggested. "Fine, I like that very much," said the third spider. "You can call me Nellie." She daintily fastened her orb line to the next spoke of the web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on this very important occasion. "Joy, Arania, Nellie," he began, "welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hollowed doorway from which to string your webs. I think it is only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure my memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever." "I pledge mine," said Joy. "I do too," said Arania. "And so do I," said Nellie, who had just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on, and the months and years came and went, he was never without friends. Fern did not come regularly to the barn anymore. She was growing up and was careful to avoid childish things, like sitting on a milk stool near a pig pen. But Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren year after year lived in the doorway. Each spring, there were new little spiders hatching out to take the place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph. and the miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good. Night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbur, this warm, delicious cellar with the geese and the changing seasons and the heat of the sun, the passage of the swallows, the nearness of the rats, the sameness of the sheep, the love of the spiders, the smell of the manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It is writer. Charlotte was both. The end. Oh, Mitchell Mustangs. Oh my goodness. What a fantastic book. Oh my goodness. I have to stop and just think for a minute. So, E.B. White does a tremendous job of bringing this book to an ending, to everything is resolved. For me, I'm thinking about the friendship, how Wilbur really did evolve and he really did become the friend that I wanted him to be. I wanted him to be just a little bit more for Charlotte. I love in the chapter yesterday how Charlotte explained her friendship and how she explained that being Wilbur's friend, she did everything for him, of course, because it's what friends do. However, I love how she said she wanted to live a life of purpose. That to me was just fantastic. How she said that being a loyal and good friend to him helped her to live the life and be the spider that she wanted to be. So great books leave us thinking and thinking. And whatever it is that you're thinking about, there are many different themes in this book. Definitely the overarching theme is friendship. And there are lots of minor themes for us to think about. I personally really did follow Wilbur and Charlotte because I am very old and sadly I've experienced losing very good friends, and the ones that are super, super special to us, we do lose a piece of us, and Charlotte left in Wilbur's heart what he needed, even though she wasn't there anymore. And it leaves me with hope. This book definitely leaves me with hope that even when we lose a piece of us, when we lose a good friend, and it's deeply sad, that there is a silver lining and there are other things out there that might give us hope, like her children, the 3 children, and then the generations and generations of spiders. So thank you so much for watching today. It's Thursday, so you get to see George. So let me call George over. George, come here, George. Come on, come on. Oh my goodness, he's actually coming. He's walking over today. He was laying down, but he's coming. So here, come here. Hi. Hey, George. Hey, George. Everybody wants to say hello. Hello, George. Everybody wants to say hello. Hello there. Hi. Oh, on cue. He gave me another little kiss there. He's so sweet. Thank you, George. Thank you for being a good listener in my film crew. All right, Mitchell Mustangs. It was a great book. Yes, that was George. He agrees. Did you hear him? He agrees. This was a great book. This was wonderful to share this together. So the last thing that I want to say to you until Monday is that I hope you enjoy your independent reading book. Enjoy Dr. Skeen tomorrow on Friday. Make sure to tune into her. Stay healthy, happy reading, happy writing, and I will see you on Monday and we will start a new book. I can't wait. Thank you.